It's Indiana in the Morning here on AM 1160 WCCS 101.1 FM. A couple of weeks ago, Commissioner Mike Baker came to our studios, and we were talking about children and youth services, and he brought along on that morning Sarah Ross, the director of Indiana County's Children and Youth Services. And Sarah, you and I came into the decision that day that we need to talk more about what Children and Youth Services is and what it does here in Indiana County. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're able to come in and visit with us today. Let's pull that microphone just a little bit closer to you there. The whole standard will come forward if you need it to. We want to talk about Children and Youth Services and how it operates within Indiana County, because there can be a lot of confusion about what I think people, if they make a call, they figure, okay, I'm calling today, the situation's solved tomorrow, and we can move on. It's not quite that way. When a call comes in to Children and Youth Services to investigate an issue involving the welfare of a child, it's really the very beginning of what could be a long process, isn't it?
It is, and that's actually one of the most common questions that we get at Children and Youth. People want to know what happens when they make a call or a complaint. So the basic process is if you call our office or if you make a complaint to Childline, the complaint is divided into one of two categories. It can either be considered a Child Protective Services a complaint, which is an abuse complaint, or it can be considered a General Protective Services. And those are more of your neglect type of cases. Mm-hmm. So once the case is assigned one of those designations, the agency has between 30 and 60 days to investigate that complaint. We have an intake department that's divided into 3 units. So the case is assigned to one of the units, and then we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort investigating to see whether the claim is legitimate or not legitimate. Mm-hmm. Based on our investigation, the case can then proceed forward, and we can either close out the case or we can put services into the home to try to help the children and the family stay together. Or the worst case scenario is when there are no other options and we have to remove a child from their natural home.
Yeah. And obviously that's heart-wrenching for everybody involved. But the overall goal is the child must be number one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our office, safety always comes first. Our secondary priority is to keep families together. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are confused about the agency, and they think we take children or we receive extra money if we take more children. But in fact, our goal is always to maintain the child safely in their own residence. Mm-hmm. So we spend a lot of our budget and we spend a lot of our powers to try to put services into the home to keep the child where they're at safely. Removing a child is always our last resort, but we do it when we feel like the child can't be maintained safely.
Looking at the latest numbers, and some of which you sent to me last week or yesterday, the state has an increase from one year to the next. Indiana County's increase in the number of incidents reported, and therefore I would say the number that are validated, Indiana County's was much higher from 2015 to 2016, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The state just released their annual child abuse report. And if you read the report in full, you can see that the state had an average increase of 5.5% in child abuse calls. Indiana County experienced about a 26% increase in child abuse calls from 2015 to 2016. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a lot more reports, and we're also seeing a lot more valid cases.
I would assume that the number of valid cases comes from the fact that you have so many more reports coming in.
That's definitely a part of it.
Okay.
Indicated reports, valid reports are up across the state. Mm-hmm. And in Indiana, one of the things that we've really been focusing on is making sure that we see children in their homes and in their schools, and we validate the reports that are valid and we dismiss the reports that are not valid.
To what do you attribute that increase in Indiana County?
Well, in Indiana County, we have a lot of mandated reporters that make a lot of reports. We also have a number of reports that come in through Childline and come in through our office that are actually custody related. So we do have an increase in reports, some of which are valid and some of which we dismiss.
Mm-hmm. And I would assume that when you get a call, that would be a part of the report that you're talking about here?
Yes,
When
absolutely.
someone calls in, because you can get a report or from somebody who's involved with CYS anyway and knows of something that's going on. But generally, your work is really generated by people who are very watchful around their neighborhood or people who are actually involved within the home.
Absolutely. We get a lot of reports from service providers. We get a lot of reports from schools. So in 2016, the agency's really been working to improve our relationship with the various school districts in Indiana County. I think that we've made a lot of strides, and we definitely still have some work to do. We definitely have some room for improvement. However, I think we're trying to educate the schools on what the agency can and can't do. And I think the schools are trying to educate us on what they can and can't do. The better working relationship we have, I think the better for the kids involved.
Talk about that partnership a little bit. When you work with the school district, are you telling them these are the things that we would like you to look out for? If you see these, then maybe we need to be notified. How does that all work?
Sure. All schools are trained in mandated reporting, so they know when they need to call Childline. But they're also doing a really good job of calling us and just keeping us updated on situations that there may be neglect involved or situations where there may be inappropriate housing. And we're doing our best to respond to the schools and let them know what services we have in place and what we are able to do to help the families.
So somebody listening at home this morning is a neighbor or a relative of a child that they think might be in a bit of a spot, might be having difficulties within the home, that falls into one of those two categories, outright abuse or abuse through neglect. What do you recommend that person do? Sir, I would think that confronting the family itself is not the avenue that they should take.
No, definitely not. We always recommend anyone who has a concern about a child should call Childline. And what will happen is that complaint is registered and then it's forwarded to our office. Now, a lot of people are concerned about calling Childline because they're afraid they're going to be identified as the caller, and that may mess up a relationship they have with the child. So one of the things, it's actually a state law, we do not ever reveal who calls Childline.
Okay.
So any person that makes a report is going to remain confidential.
Parents in split households, a child goes and lives with mom or with dad, and the parent with whom that child is not living suspects that there may be abuse going on or neglect going on. Is there a large percentage of that happening in Indiana County, and what do you do in those cases? Because you could see where a parent would say, maybe if I report something, I'll get that child.
We do get a lot of that. We get a lot of calls where one parent in a custody situation or a grandparent or relative in a custody situation is trying to get a leg up on the other party. We do get a lot of those calls, and we investigate them just like we would investigate any other complaint and see if the report is valid or not. Unfortunately, those types of false or malicious claims take away the resources from our intake department, and they take away the resources and our availability to investigate legitimate complaints. So it really can be a problem, but I can assure you that any call we get, we do investigate.
You have been involved as the director of Indiana County's Children and Youth Services for just over a year?
Correct.
Okay. You came into the staff and you saw what you had there and what Indiana County was dealing with. And then in the course of that year, you get this great increase in the number of reported cases. Was the agency equipped to handle that increase in the first place, and where does it stand now in terms of its ability to handle this tremendous responsibility?
I think that's one of the ways that I was really lucky as a new director. My intake department is led by a really, really quality intake manager who has a lot of experience. I have 3 really good supervisors. One of them is new. And I have a staff that puts child welfare first. So I'm not going to say we were equipped to handle the increase, but what I will say is we did it, and we did it really, really well. We took the calls, we saw the kids, we investigated, and I think we had a lot of successes in our intake department. So I won't say we were equipped to handle it, but I will say that my team did a really, really great job in 2016.
And of course, in these troubled economic times all across the state, and I would assume much of your funding relies upon the state, it has to be a challenge to receive that much of an increase when funding is actually going down across the Commonwealth.
It is, absolutely. And our budget, one of the things that we have in our intake department is a housing grant we use the money to help families with things like utility bills or food, clothing for certain children. So when economic times are down, it's really tough on the agency because we spend a lot more money on those types of housing, clothing, and food resources. Mm-hmm. So we do try to maintain a full intake staff. That can be tough. One of the things that child welfare is facing across the state is a higher turnover rate. Indiana County has not experienced that, so we've actually been really, really lucky here because our workers are so invested in child welfare that they stay with me.
You got a lot of people that really are concerned for the child, and that's a good reason to work there, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. My people consistently put child welfare first. You know, they work long hours, they work hard hours, they're out on call almost every single night, and they come in the next day and do it all over again.
She's Sarah Ross. We're out of time for this segment. We might have to schedule you back in and talk a little bit more about Children and Youth Services and what you do here in Indiana County. But thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me.
It is Indiana in the Morning, presented as always by First Commonwealth Bank, and it's AM 1160 WCCS, 101.1 FM.